computer. All right. Hey there, folks. We got sidetracked last week due to the blackouts, but we're back. Since book tour and conventions have been put on hold for a bit, I figured I would bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Tonight, we have a great panel discussion about the women of Star Trek. On our panel is Amy Imhoff, a freelance writer and digital content manager who specializes in genre fandom, pop culture, and feminist issues, and is a staple on the Star Trek panel circuit. Let me also introduce Rigel Ailur, who has written more than 20 novels and novellas and has contributed work to Strange New Worlds, Daily Fiction, Science Fiction, Story Portal, and others. Her alter ego, Chris Katzen, has contributed stories to Badass Moms and Brave New Girls Volumes 4 and 5, and I actually have stories in all three of those as well. And last but not least, Kelli Fitzpatrick is an author, educator, and community activist. Her Star Trek story, The Sunwalkers, won the Strange New Worlds 2016 contest, and her essay appears online at StarTrek.com and Women at Warp and in print from Seacard and ATB Publishing. And she is currently writing for the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi,
right.
Russ.
How you guys doing? All right. So good. I'm glad. Thank you for being flexible on the dates, but Mother Nature had plans of her own. All right. So for those of you who are tuning in, feel free to send me questions in the chat box throughout the hour, and we'll get to some of them at the end of the show. All right. So let's get right to it. All right. We're all huge Star Trek fans, and you've written about Star Trek in various forms. And tonight we're talking about the women of Star Trek. So here's my question for you guys, and I was thinking about this one. When you first started watching Star Trek, when you first got into it, how did it or did not reflect the tremendous capabilities that women obviously bring to the table? And let me start with Kelli.
For me, the first show that I really got into was Voyager, so I would say that it absolutely reflected that. I can't say that I was necessarily thinking about gender dynamics and representation when I was watching it as a child. It just was there and I appreciated it. But seeing Captain Janeway have her strong leadership style, watching B'Elanna Torres run the engineering room like a boss, and watching Seven dominate Etermestrix, you know, all of these different things. I feel like I was able to see women in all sorts of different positions of strength and community on Voyager, and I think that kind of set the tone for what I expected from Star Trek.
And Rigel, how about you?
Well, I've loved it since the beginning. So for me, the first representation was Uhura, who I really loved, but frankly, she didn't have much to do in the show. So it's no huge secret that, you know, in its earliest stages, Star Trek was lacking as far as that was concerned. Her role did expand in the movies, which was gratifying to see, and a great deal in the novels, which was even more intriguing because it often went in different directions. But, you know, for the most part, Uhura was my first exposure. Then, of course, as the franchise progressed, the progress was reflected by the roles women had as well.
Right. And Amy, how about you?
So I started watching Next Generation when I was 7, and the first episode that I saw, I remember very distinctly, was yesterday's Enterprise.
Hey, Amy,
and
can you increase your volume a little bit?
Oh, sure, no problem. And the very first person I remember seeing was Tasha Yar, and of course the ladies of Next Generation. My favorite was clearly Troy, because we both have hair that's big and full of secrets. And no, I love Marina and Gates and Denise, and I think they're wonderful. And of course, when Janeway came onto the scene when I was about 12, seeing her, and of course seeing B'Elanna, you know, the women of Voyager, like Kelli said, are so strong. And the show passes the Bechdel test the most often, which means that they speak to each other about something other than I. And a lot of the time on Next Generation, Troy and Crusher really were talking about the guys on the ship. So I was nice to see them fully present on the bridge in roles, you know, doctor, ship's counselor, that kind of thing. But, you know, Voyager is really where I feel like the series kind of, or the Star Trek franchise kind of came together and really gave us those women's roles. And I know I skipped Deep Space Nine, but that's because I didn't watch all of Deep Space Nine until I was in college. So it was and of course Kira and Dax are the best.
All right. So speaking of which, so across the major iterations of Star Trek, it's mostly been a boys' club in the captain's chair. And then along comes Janeway. Now, Voyager, being cut off the ship from most of the Federation, could very easily have ended up a whole Lord of the Flies, and it could have gone in a very bad direction. But Janeway pulled the crew together. So my question is, what is it about for you? What is it about the character and Jane Mulgrew as the actor that pulled it all together? And Amy, this one's for you.
Yes, I think you mean Kate Mulgrew.
Kate,
Jane
yes,
Mulgrew.
sorry. Kate, yes, sorry, my bad. My bad.
It's all right, Janeway, we got you. But okay, so pulling it, like you said, pulling it all together. I think the franchise was ripe to have a woman in the captain's chair, and I think we've definitely continued that trend now, going forward, seeing Michael Burnham, seeing Georgiou, seeing the other ladies of Discovery. But really, Janeway was quite a pioneer, especially on TV at the time. Scully on the X-Files and Janeway are basically the same. Like, they only were about 18 months apart in their debut on TV, and they really set the tone in terms of science fiction. And seeing some of seeing how Janeway handled herself as both, I'm the captain, I'm in charge, but also having that level of compassion and humanity that I think was necessary, especially being stranded so far from home and bringing everybody together, and in that period of isolation. I think we're seeing a lot of Voyager's messages resonating, especially as we're all marooned in our own little Delta quadrants during this pandemic.
Right.
And I just, for me, Janeway was someone that I could look up to, and not only that, but also, every week she was that presence that was there. She was my captain. She was there for me in ways that I think that Picard or Sisko or Kirk would not necessarily be for a young woman, just because, seeing that woman in charge and seeing how far she had come in her career and seeing the storylines that they gave her was really fulfilling for me.
Kel?
Ditto everything that Amy said, and I would add on to that, I really appreciated the fact that Janeway held on to her ethics even when Starfleet was not there to really enforce them. So as she said, they really were stranded very far away from home, and it would have been very easy to devolve into their own justifications for acting in ways that would not have been supported by Star Trek's values. And we got to see that in action with the Equinox when they met this other ship that was doing very nefarious things. And Janeway says, no, that's not who we are. We are Starfleet, and we are going to behave that way. But on the same note, she's able to negotiate and to come up with creative solutions to problems. And she really goes through the whole Delta Quadrant making allies. So she pulls in, crew members who are Talaxian and Borg, and makes friends with races that maybe we're not used to that sort of approach to diplomacy, and even kind of wins over Q, which I feel like is a pretty big achievement. So I love the fact that she kept them fundamentally who they were, but also responded uniquely and creatively to the situation they were in.
Okay, so let me ask you. So along this thread, so while Kira Nerys wasn't in the captain's chair because DS9 was kind of a different kind of Star Trek, she was every bit a leader. So what's your take on the character? Kel, follow up there.
For Kira, she is, for me, the embodiment of someone who very much knows who she is and discovers who she is even more over the course of her character arc. So she has one of the best arcs, I think, of all the women in Star Trek for that reason. And she is able to affect not only her own growth and the station, but eventually the relationship with the Cardassian Empire and the fate of her entire people, maybe even the entire quadrant, if we're going to pull in the Dominion and the wormhole.
Right.
So she stays herself through the whole time. She's loyal to her faith and such, but she also learns and grows and affects the people around her.
So Rigel, what about you?
Oh yeah, regarding both of them, regarding Kira and Janeway. Janeway, for me, because I started at the beginning. Janeway was a long time in coming. And I loved Janeway. I adored her. She was a wonderful character. I would say, though, the way she was written was problematic. And very much the way Gillian Anderson played Scully, the way Kate Mulgrew played Janeway, basically saved the character. Gave the character what consistency she had and the depth. So Janeway was fantastic. And then Kira, for me, as anyone who knows me, as far as I'm concerned, Kira's not only the best character in all of Trek, she's one of the best characters ever in all of fiction. And that's up against incredible competition. I mean, there's Spock, there's Pike, there's Kirk. They're all Picard. There are tons of incredible characters. Tons of incredible characters. But Kira, she was always dynamic. She was always three-dimensional and incredible actress. But not only that, the way she was written, the best thing about Kira was the way she was written, the way she was played. She was never the chick. Even when she was pregnant, she was never just the chick. She was always a well-rounded character. And she had the arc, like Kelli said. And just, Kira's just amazing. I think she's the best thing in Trek, and that's out of a ton of incredible things in Trek.
So let's keep this thread going a little bit. So in Star Trek Discovery, Michael Burnham, again, while not the captain, is the star of the show. She has a very complex arc over 2 seasons. What's your take on the character, Amy?
Yes, I was actually just still thinking about Kira, but I thought we were going to do a little more on her.
Okay.
But no, I do want to talk about Michael Burnham. Just a quick aside on Kira, but it applies to all the women.
Go for it.
Which is that I think Kira has the greatest feminist agency. Having studied feminist agency in literature and especially in the way men write women and giving them feminist agency. I mean, most of Star Trek is written by men. That's just the fact. And to have a character like Kira who has romantic relationships and is a career woman and has, these struggles that she's had in her past that Kira shows, she you guys said she's three-dimensional, she's well-rounded. That's what makes her a great character. So if applying feminist agency to any of these characters that we'll be talking about tonight is really important because it means that they're able to decide their own fate and to change their circumstances and to drive the action. And Burnham certainly did that from the get-go, seeing as she started an interstellar war. And I think seeing her take the screen and take the helm of the series was very powerful, especially for me personally, because I am also adopted like she is. And I didn't even realize it for the first, half a dozen episodes, that I was like, oh, a lead of Star Trek is adopted. That's pretty awesome. But seeing her as a character that is not perfect, she's not kind of held up to the same ideal that I think Janeway would be held up to, or, I felt like she was definitely more of a scrappy, more B'Elanna than Janeway in a way. And I think she kind of, like you said, she doesn't fit into that rubric. She's not the chick. She's definitely someone who's still learning. She's a first officer and not a captain, so she doesn't have that experience necessarily to ground her and ground some of her decisions. But I think it's good to see that because we don't start out perfect. When just having seen Lower Decks and everyone was like, oh, everyone on the bridge is ready for action and always right and very decisive and knows what they're doing. But we don't all start out like that. We start out younger. We start out less experienced, and I think Burnham is a good example of that and a good showcase of that.
Kelli?
I love Burnham. I love that she screws up right away, and in a pretty giant way.
Yes,
so Starfleet is meant to be an idealized place, and yet humans are still human and other species still make mistakes. And so we get to see this character who is our focal point and who is our perspective in the show really get to mess up and then have to live with those consequences. So a lot of episodes, sometimes all of the problems kind of get wrapped up at the end of that episode, and this plays out. This has a huge impact on her career, and yet there's always hope. And she gets to be that beacon of hope, especially in the second season. And I won't spoil anything in case you haven't seen Discovery, but I really love the arc that she goes through, and the way that especially her and Captain Pike play off from each other, and the way that she comes to terms with her own identity and her own place within the universe. Because I think after the pilot, she's kind of feeling like, well, I screwed it up. That's it. There's nothing to look forward to. And she kind of carves her own way from there. And that ties back into the agency that Amy was talking about earlier. I feel like Burnham has been written in a way that allows her that agency.
Rigel?
Yeah, the same thing. Totally love Burnham. Really, really love Burnham. Are you not hearing me?
We got you.
Okay, good. Sorry, my computer's acting up. Yeah, like Kelly just said, she also started out complex, a flawed character, a very complicated character at the beginning. And I loved the arc. I mean, what happened in the first season and then what happened in the second was even better. And touching on what she just said, but agreeing with it and going even further, I loved the camaraderie that showed up between her and Pike, because they were both such dynamic, powerful characters, and they ended up working really well together. And it reminded me a bit, after season 1 or 2, of Kira and Cisco, who also developed an incredibly close, good, strong friendship. And that's one of the things that I think isn't done often enough. Women in Trek, or women in fiction in general, when they show up, they have to be the romance. But of course, they don't. They do have their own agency. So Burnham in Discovery is just fantastic. Burnham's great. All the characters. Burnham, the Emperor, Tilly. Much as I love Burnham, and she is definitely the lead, and deservedly so, Tilly's the breakout character of the show, I think.
I agree, for sure.
Well,
Can
that was actually one of our questions.
I say why I love her?
We're going to get to that. So go ahead. So you know what? We got to Tilly. So Amy, go ahead. You started chatting, so go for it.
Yes, Tilly is fantastic, and I think, like I said, she is one of us as a fan. She comes in and she's like, "This is so cool." She drops the F-bomb. Like, we would all be on a starship going, "Oh my God, look at that!" And I think she's refreshing in a way that there hasn't been a Star Trek character like her before. And I also think it's important to note that she represents, to me, some body diversity in the female pantheon of Star Trek characters. Everyone in the that we have mentioned is very trim and not curvy and not like tall, doesn't have, aside from like Troy with all her big hair, it's nice to see a different body type represented. It's nice to see myself and my curves represented in Tilly. And it's also nice to just see that she has this like bubbly kind of happy. I mean, these are serious people usually, these are not people who are overly emotive or overly ready and willing to share their thoughts that are like right at the top of their head. And I love that about Tilly.
I mean, she definitely gave a very, like you said, a kind of a very different optic to the character. Although I have to admit, sometimes I found that I'm not sure it seemed to me always believable that a character who was kind of so sort of nervously insecure would be allowed in such a position of on a starship bridge. But her performance was sort of a different, it was certainly used to comic effect in certain places, and it kind of changed the dynamic to what was overall very serious kind of 2 seasons.
Can I talk to that a little bit, Russ? Because that was one of the aspects of Tilly's character that I really appreciated, was the representation of folks who deal with anxiety or who deal with nervousness more so than other people. And I think she represented the way that it can very much be managed. And it doesn't have to hold people back. And so she has this, we learn right away, she has this ambition of being in command, and she's not going to let anything stop her from getting there. And so she finds ways of overcoming these things. And I appreciated that not every character was stoic and reserved, which there's a time and a place for that. But Dick, right? Like, we have all sorts of different people in Starfleet, and so it was really nice to see that represented.
I also think Starfleet would be amenable to having newcomers and newbies be on the bridge. I mean, how else are you going to learn, right? You got to be thrown in the deep end sometimes.
Sure. So let's.
Yeah, I want to agree with that too. She was a cadet. You know, she came in as a cadet trainee. It would have been very, very strange if she had acted, you know, completely know-it-all and full of confidence, like a captain would or a senior officer would. She was there to learn, and I thought they handled that marvelously.
So let's stay on Discovery for a minute. So what about one of the more fascinating characters, at least for me, was Captain Georgiou. She sort of had they started off in one way and went in a very different direction. So Rigel, what did you think?
I loved her. I was actually disappointed we didn't see, as far as I was concerned, we didn't see nearly enough of Captain Georgiou. Now, once the Emperor showed up, that was also a fantastic character. I really enjoyed her as well. But even with all the progress, there is such a lack of Starfleet captains who happen to be women. I would have liked to have seen more of that one, just because she did, thanks to the wonderful Michelle Yeoh, she came across like such a strong character. But as far as Georgiou the Emperor, yeah, she kicked butt. She pulled no punches. Although, ironically, considering the subject here, one of the funniest and best scenes she had was Googling over the baby. I just thought it added another dimension to her.
Kelli,
But yeah, Georgiou is great.
Kelli?
I agree 100%. I wanted a show with Captain Georgiou because I felt like that dynamic between her and Burnham was strong. I could see that, oh wow, this is going to be another female captain that I am going to look up to and admire, and then she vanishes from the show. And while I find the Emperor a fascinating character, not quite the same, beacon of ethics and, Star Trek values that I was excited about in Georgiou. So the acting is phenomenal. I'm interested, to see where it goes from here. But lost opportunity to let her, stick around a little longer.
So I want to go back actually to DS9 for a minute. I'm not sure if it's exactly the flip side, but throughout the years, I've heard two overriding sentiments about Dax. On the one hand, she's great because she can hold her own with anyone, including Worf, or she's a Mary Sue. She's almost too perfect, good at everything, very few flaws. Amy, what's your take on the character?
I think someone who has lived for 9 lifetimes probably knows a little something. That's my opinion. I do not think she's a Mary Sue. I do not like the term Mary Sue. I think it is often ascribed to female characters in a way that it's all very negative, and it makes me irritated when people say things like that, especially about Rey from Star Wars, or like, there's the argument that Wesley's a Mary Sue. Like, it's not something. I would rather focus on what is there and what is present in the character rather than kind of ascribing this trait, this set of traits really to somebody like Dax, who is a science officer, who has lived, has had the symbiont experience, that has lived many lifetimes, has had many lovers, has had many jobs, has had the kind of depth and breadth of experience that Dax had. And it was interesting to see how they had her in the first season or two, kind of that more very cool and reserved Dax, and then we see her kind of coming out of her shell, you know, in the later seasons. And especially, you know, one of my very favorite episodes is You Are Cordially Invited. And yes, it's a wedding, and yes, I'm a
Mhm.
girl and I like it, but I really like it because it shows how strong Dax is and how much she's willing to fight for what she, for you know, for the person she loves and for what she wants to do and be in life. There's also a really good moment with her. Well, I mean, there are a lot of good moments with Dax, but I don't I am definitely in the camp of Dax is great. I really like her. I wish we had gotten more with her. I wish we'd gotten more focused on her storylines because I think that was a huge cast, and of course they had to, you know, work through everybody. I would have liked to have seen more of her and Kira's friendship. I think it's very important to show women who are colleagues and friends and playing off each other in a way that doesn't involve their relationships, that involves science or tactical necessity, or you know, other things like that. So
Yeah, I mean, what
I
she
will
was,
I will
I agree. I thought she was great. The fact that she lived so many lifetimes, to me, it was completely reasonable that she would be super capable on so many levels. Because you live a long time, you're gonna pick up a few things. You know, put all those experiences together. But Kelly, what was Dax for you?
She's one of my favorite characters, second only maybe to Janeway. And I agree that she's completely believable. And I'm really kind of tired of hearing that women can't do things. Like this stereotype just needs to take a hike, because I know a lot of incredibly capable, powerful, talented, driven, passionate women in real life that have only lived one lifetime. And so for somebody to tell me that no, that can't possibly exist as a character type within narrative, yeah, no. Like we're just done with that. It's 2020, we're done. So she is
exactly.
amazing. We need more characters like Dax. I loved her squaring with all of her past lives and
Mhm.
working through all of the relationship complexities. I loved seeing the people around her that were friends with her, including Cisco, adapt to her new identity, and they were just like, "Yay, Jadzia!" And
When he would call her old man, I thought that was always great.
it was great because it showed the complexity, of those experiences that they'd had together, and then they were building on them with new
Mhm.
ones on DS9. So I love her. I wish she had, been on the show longer, but we got some amazing character moments with her.
The
So,
first time I met Kelly, she was dressed like Dax and she had
I
the same.
was
correct.
indeed.
Oh, awesome. So I think you've kind of got to the heart of really what's at this panel to begin with, which is look. So in fiction, even science
Well,
fiction. Well,
before we move
hang on.
on about Dax, since we were just talking about her, I agree with what they both said about her being a wonderful character, but I'm going to dissent just a little bit and perhaps raise some eyebrows because however much I love him, and I do, I think when Worf showed up on Deep Space Nine, especially the first season, Dax suffered and Kira suffered because they didn't know. Worf took a lot of Kira's temper. Suddenly there could only be one badass for some reason. And later on, much as I love Dax, she ended up the chick with the whole Klingon marriage wedding type thing. So, as fantastic as Dax was, I thought she was underused. I thought there was a lot of wasted potential there.
I mean, I think there's no doubt that someone who lived as many lifetimes as her, there could have been endless storylines for her, and too bad we didn't get to see more of them. But as I was about to say, I think we're kind of getting at the heart underlying this whole discussion to begin with, which is, look, in science fiction and any fiction really, men are typically allowed, if not encouraged, to be men, warts and all, but women typically get held to different standards. So what's your take on the issue of femininity in Star Trek? The juxtaposition of women being capable in their various roles versus the freedom to be feminine. So, Amy.
I think that's like the core of the issues that people had with Janeway, and that Kate received that criticism from the studio, from the production team, from, fans. And for a long time, I think was told that, men don't want to be told what to do by a woman. And that they had to walk that line of having her be more feminine, and they put her in the 3-inch heels, and they gave her the complicated hair, and they, finally by the end of it, the hair was, it's like with Kira too. Kira started out, I remember in the pilot, Kira started out with that, like, the hair was like a longish bob, and then she just cut it really short. She was like, Nana says that she was like, this is a character that doesn't have time for styling products. And I think that's overall that's what I think overall that's a trend today. Look at all of the female characters that we're seeing who kind of eschew that traditional beauty look, like Eleven from Stranger Things and Charlize Theron in Mad Max
Right.
as Furiosa. These are women who shave their heads, and they are one of the guys. That's the only way they're going to get respect, is by doing that, is by eliminating that femininity. And for Star Trek, they, like you said, they've always had somebody who's the chick. It's Troy, or it's a little bit Dax. I would say less. I know Rigel said that, and it is true. They did, they put Dax in the bathing suit and the purple dress and all that. But I as a woman who loves Star Trek and loves badass ladies, but also likes fake eyelashes and fancy and shoes and all that, I think it's important that we recognize that, this is a choice that I am making for myself, versus like a studio head is telling me that I have to wear my hair up in a giant bun, and I have to, look a certain way. I mean, look at Seven of Nine. I mean, the doctor designed her to have this hair, and he designed this very form-fitting suit for her, and she wore the spike heels. And I think Seven of Nine is like the pinnacle of discussing this, because it's obvious she was brought in for sex, and it was obvious she's brought in for TNA, and none of the women and none of the actors are going to refute that and say that that's not the case. And I think that, yes, they wanted a ratings boost, and it came in the form of, well, let's appeal to the 18 to 34 male demographic. And, I think that it's nice with some of the newer things on streaming, where they don't necessarily have to rely on the all-powerful Nielsen ratings, that it's nice to see female characters being in both ends of the spectrum when
Right.
it comes to femininity, and everywhere in between.
Cal?
I would say it's not just important for female characters to be able to act either masculine or feminine, but I would say we need to question what those words even mean, because in an idealized Star Trek future, I envision individuals being able to identify and define themselves. So who says that barging into a flaming engine room to self-sacrifice isn't a feminine trait, which Janeway does, is she's all like greased up with stuff in Year of Hell. Who says that sitting quietly on the floor in front of a candle isn't masculine while you're meditating, which Tuvok does? And I adore and respect both of those characters. So I would say we not only need to start giving these characters diverse representations and expressions of gender, but we need to start interrogating, how do we even understand our definitions of gender in a way that deconstructs some of those potentially damaging stereotypes, or at least makes them less rigid. Like, there's nothing wrong with any of those particular expressions, as long as Amy said, the individual is showing that that's what they want. And there's evidence that Trek has done this in the past. I mean, we saw men in dress uniforms in, I think it was TNG, right? Always in the background, but like, they're there. So there's no reason why we can't push that direction a little bit further as far as breaking down those stereotypes.
After Rigel talks, I just want to add something, just so you know.
Yeah, Rigel.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you both said. I think we will go a long way to overcoming and eliminating sexism when people quit attributing gender to adjectives, whether the adjective be strong or quiet or dainty or big or brave or bossy, or I think we have to get away from assigning a gender to everything. Like you were saying, Janeway charging into an engine room, or B'Elanna throwing a punch, Cass not throwing a punch. There really shouldn't be a definition. They're all feminine because they're women.
All right, so
So,
along these lines, and I kind of wanted to dig just a little bit deeper. So the question is, should gender matter? And I mean, on the one hand, if you're talking about just getting the job done, on the surface anyway, it would seem like gender should not matter at all. But in the real world, or fictional world, whether you're human, Ferengi, Vulcan, or what have you, gender distinctions are simply impossible to ignore because genders are different. What's your take on that, Kel?
Okay, this is a complex question. So we don't have time to dig completely into the difference between like biological sex and like gender identity and gender expression, but those are all separate things. But if we're talking about the sort of social question of should gender matter in the sense of should we pay attention to it? Yes and no. Like, as you said, it shouldn't matter when deciding is X individual capable of doing X job? Because if they're qualified, then they're qualified, and that shouldn't matter. But if we're talking about representation in a given field or on screen, if we're looking at this from a fiction and a writing perspective, then it absolutely matters. And especially on the back end of it, so those people who are the content creators, who are writing, who are producing, who are consulting, it's very important to have diverse representation, not just along gender lines, but race lines, sexuality, everything. Because if you don't have that, then you run the risk of not just alienating a perspective, but of perpetrating and furthering harmful stereotypes that might have been picked up if you had a diverse group of people in the room. So it's something to be celebrated. It shouldn't be looked at as a limitation, but it's also not something to ignore. Sometimes I hear this argument that, well, your gender shouldn't just matter, they should just take the best people, and let's stop talking about gender. But the reality is that we live in a structure in our world that has institutionally created roadblocks to that and bottlenecks to that. And so to undo that, you have to consciously dismantle that infrastructure. And so we have to talk about it. We have to talk about lack of representation on screen and off screen in order to move toward that Star Trek ideal of having equal access and equal opportunity to every type of person that might want to participate in the society.
Amy?
Yeah, everything Kelly said was correct, especially about the nuances that are held within gender, and especially, we were talking a lot about male and female, but there's people throughout the spectrum, people who are non-binary and don't identify with either of those, and I think it's necessary to examine and kind of break open the tropes that we're seeing and the trying to think of a good way to phrase it. Well, going off of what we were talking about a little bit earlier with, oh, this person has to be feminine, this person's the chick, this person's, those kind of things. It carries over from Star Trek into fandom, it carries over into everything in institutionally and all that. But since, we're focusing on women of Star Trek, running the panels that I run on stage and seeing the response that I get to them, it's like, I had a professor from I think she teaches at UPenn. She's super awesome. Her name's also Amy, so I remember. And she said, I'm at Star Trek Las Vegas and it's Saturday, and why has it been 5 days at the 50th anniversary and you're the first woman to walk out and host a panel on stage? And I said, girl, I wish I knew. But it's just a matter of, I don't think it's a harmful in malicious intent, but I think it's just something where it's assumed that, these are the people who are going to be hosting something, and, are they all straight white men? Are they all straight white men over 50? It's like it keeps going, and you have to look at it and say, we need a diversity of opinion. We need a diversity of experience. I mean, you're not going to get the same response on who you think Captain Janeway is and what she means to you from a guy who's in his 40s that you will from a woman who's in her 40s who grew up seeing Janeway, or who arrived into her life at that seminal point when she was maybe trying to choose a career. I see so many women in STEM coming out and saying to Kate, I'm a naval officer because of you. I work for NASA because of you. I drive the Mars rover because of Janeway. It's like, these women are affecting policy in this country, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a big fan of Kate, so Stacey Abrams. And I think seeing the impact that Janeway has had, you're not going to get that kind of impact from somebody saying like, oh, I watched James Kirk when I was a boy and now I'm in politics. It's like, you just don't get that, And I just, a lot of what Kelly was saying, and there's so many things that we could be unpacking, but this panel is only so many minutes long.
All right. So speaking of which, for those of you who are watching, if you have questions and comments, and I'm seeing them in the chat box, keep sending them, and we're going to get to some questions at the end. But now it's time for the special segment of the show where we spin the wheel. So I've got 7 categories on the wheel, which I have specially created for this panel. And
all right.
And those particular ones are, and hang on one second, we got red shirts, Beam Me Up Scotty, Crew Stew, Quark's Lark, Kira's Conundrum, Sick Bay, and Shot Through the Heart. All right.
Wow.
Oh, no.
We're gonna spin the wheel, and what you get is what you play. All right, Rigel, you're up first. You ready?
All right, Rigel, you take
right.
one for the team. You go first.
Yeah. Good luck, Rachel.
All right, so first up is Kira's
Oh boy.
Kira's
We'll
Conundrum.
see.
All right, Kira Nerys is
All
given.
right, it's about
Okay.
Kira. This is very good.
All right, Kira Nerys is given a choice: lead DS9 or get her own starship. Which one does she choose?
Lead the space station or her own starship?
Yes.
Okay, what would Kira choose? I don't think it would be any choice for her. She's always been all about Bajor. She would stay on Deep Space Nine. I mean, there were times she commanded the Defiant. And so she's no stranger to starships, but she's just very much a woman of her world. And I don't think she has any desire to be out and about. I think she'd stay on Deep Space Nine.
All right, she's a hometown girl. All right, Kelly, you're up. You ready?
I am. Let's
All
go.
right, here we go. Kelly, you got red shirts, which I wore just for the occasion. So the poor red shirts of Star Trek are always getting killed on the away team. If you were a red shirt and your time was numbered, which 2 celebrities would you want with you on your fateful mission?
Oh gosh, like Star Trek celebrities?
You pick
Like-
whatever you want.
On my fateful mission. So I know that this is my last.
You're
trip
a red shirt.
Oh gosh. Well, then I'm taking Janeway and Dax with me, and we're gonna enjoy the time that we have left. Like that's what we're doing.
Going out in a blaze of glory. All
We
right.
are.
All
It's
right.
gonna be spectacular. Something will
scared.
explode.
I'm scared for you, Kelly. You would sacrifice yourself to save them.
Oh, I would for sure.
It would be better.
All right, Amy, you ready? Your
I'm
turn.
ready. I'm scared.
All right, what do we got for you? Oh, you are also a red shirt.
Oh,
So,
good. Oh, I know the answer.
who are you going down to? Who are you going?
I'm going down with Gwendolyn Christie, because she's the best. And of course, I'll bring Kate with me. I would sacrifice myself for that woman.
Nice.
All right, the ladies are going down in a blaze of glory. Okay, so now we're going to move over to our advice column, except that we're going to do a little bit of a different take on it. So for anyone who's writing or creating Star Trek, what's the best advice you could give them for current and future iterations of Star Trek? Rigel, you're up first.
Oh, that's a tough one because it's not an open market. So actually, my advice would be don't aim for Star Trek. That the opportunities are just so limited. Now, the exception to that, however,
No, I guess I'm
it's
talking
starting
about what kind of storylines do you want to see the writers pushing Star Trek into?
Oh, do I want them to do?
Yes.
Okay, especially for Discovery coming up. Now, this is just strictly a matter of taste, of course, not quality. There's nothing wrong with people who prefer the opposite. I loathe dystopia and apocalyptic fiction. So I have no interest whatsoever in the fall of the Federation. It looks, however, like they will be doing the rise of the Federation. So that's very much a story I would like to see in season 3.
All right, Kelly.
I agree along the lines of like, I want more NASA and less Hunger Games. Like, I want the sense of wonder and that exploration of deep space is something that I'd like to see kind of maybe rise to the surface a little bit more. I enjoy all types of Star Trek stories, but that's where my heart is right now, is wanting to see a little bit more of that. And also, the complexity of cultures. So like, no more monocultures. Like, let's see the variety of life on these other worlds.
All right, so more hope and inspiration. All right, Amy, how about you?
I don't have necessarily a problem with dystopia. I think not even dystopia, but more like I think that holding the Federation to such a high standard is a recipe for having them fail. And it's kind of nice to see that this is something we have to keep maintaining. We have to keep maintaining what's good and hopeful, or it can go south real quickly. So that part I think is not necessarily as much of a primary directive that I would give to the writers. I just want to see more of the ladies that we know, and I want to see more of the ladies that we have just been introduced. I would love to see more of Raffi. I'd love to see more of what Seven of Nine's life looks like now that she's, I would honestly, Star Trek Fenris Ranger, like I want to see that.
Totally.
Like, that's what I would love to see. And I'm very intrigued as to how they are going to be working with Discovery in season 3, seeing as that they've been thrown so far into the future. And I'm also looking forward to Strange New Worlds, and I want to really see number 1 be developed. I want to see all of the things that Majel never got to do with her. So I think that would be a really lovely reward for her legacy as being someone who is such an integral part of the show. If we see this character that initially she was supposed to embody as number 1, then going and becoming like, yet another badass lady character to add to the pantheon.
All right, so we're going to now take some questions from the guests. We got a bunch in here, and one I wanted to get to for sure, and we did not address already, was let's talk a little bit about the female Klingon characters. We didn't talk about them at all. So Kelli,
Very cheapo.
so go ahead.
So,
what do you think here?
I love the Klingon females. I think they are underutilized in classic Trek, as Amy is going to point out here. They get to shine in disco, but I love Lursa and B'Etor. I think that it shows just like how keen they are into not just their culture, but like the Federation. So like they're able to like bring down the Enterprise, and I feel like they are just a really, really badass pair of sisters who know what they want and they go after it. And then I just absolutely love Ambassador Ailur. She did not deserve the fate she got. And I wanted to see her be a mother who's a diplomat, who is, I felt like she was one of the only characters who truly negotiates. She stood in the space between the Klingon Empire and some of these other worlds, and kept her Klingon heritage, but was able to really lean in and see the differences between those cultures in a way that was diplomatically productive.
And Rigel?
Yeah, the same thing. I don't know. In Discovery, I loved the Klingon Chancellor, and also we got to see in the Star Trek movies the woman, and this is terrible, I'm blanking on her name, but her father got killed and she inherited the chancellorship. For me, they ended up doing some great things with Klingon culture, Vulcan culture, Romulan, but they all started out from the 60s. You only saw the men, and it was automatically assumed that they were all patriarchal, just like Earth history. So, I mean, this is very much woulda, coulda, shoulda, I guess, but it would have been nice to see more diversity of culture, like Kelli and Amy both also mentioned, and, have culture show up where there was no dichotomy, there was no patriarchy. Things were either egalitarian, matriarchy, things like that. So, I mean, the Klingon women are great, but we've hardly gotten to see enough of them.
Amy?
And it's because of the origins of the race.
Amy?
course, I have to talk about Mary Chieffo because she's the best, and she's got her like doctorate in Klingon history now, and I just love her talking about Klingon history and diplomacy on Twitter. But I think that seeing Klingon women as mothers and seeing the way that the men in their society, kind of going a little bit off what Rigel was saying about seeing a matriarchal culture, where women are revered for their ability to bear children and seen as like being extra strong because they can handle such a difficult process that their body goes through is pretty incredible. And I would really love to see Star Trek kind of do more with that mother trope. A trope sounds a little bit too narrow, but if you think about the women on Star Trek, the only one who is really a mom is Dr. Crusher. We saw B'Elanna give birth right in the finale. We saw Kira as a conduit for O'Brien and Keiko's baby, but we have not really seen a lot of women actually be mothers. It's kind of implied that if you're in Starfleet, you're not really going to be having kids. And I would really like to see both of those things happen because I think, can women have it all in our culture today? Not yet. Not yet. It's still really hard. And I think we could all be working toward that future. And it would be great to see a vision of the future that included that as being something that's possible.
Oh, sorry, I guess. So we got another minute or two. So one of the questions was, and we touched on it a little bit, was on 7 of 9, how she was kind of a frustrating character to begin with. Obviously there was a lot of, blatant eye candy going on there. But from the time we first see her till where she ends up now, how do you think they handled that, given the way they started? Kel?
So I appreciated Seven's arc. I love the fact that she's a ranger now and she is going back and sort of helping other Borg make that transition that was so hard for her. I wish they hadn't made her an alcoholic. Like, I kind of feel like that's like a trope that we just didn't need.
Do you think she's an alcoholic, or do you think she just needs to take a break once in a while?
I don't know. That's how I read it, and maybe that's inaccurate, but I feel like as Amy said, I want to see more of her being a ranger and being able to actually go and do those things to help the rest of her people. I liked seeing her slowly kind of learn about humanity as she made her path. I don't know. I feel like it was kind of maybe thrust upon her. She didn't necessarily have as much choice in it as she would have wanted, and yet, I think she makes the best of it.
Rigel? Oh, you got to unmute. You're on mute. There you go.
She's a great character, but yeah, a great character, not served well by the costume at first, even though they made some excuses for it in the books. It supposedly had medical reasons. Love the way she turned out. In spite of that, she was always, an incredibly smart, resourceful, strong character. And I thought Jerry Ryan played her magnificently. Someone else may not have done nearly as good of a job. So, yeah, I didn't start out very auspiciously, but yeah, definitely still one of my favorites anyway.
Amy?
I really like the storyline that we got having to do with 7 of 9's trauma. There's a lot of rape analogy, especially in the Raven and some of the other things that she underwent. The one with the was it the Cardassian doctor? Someone violated her. I can't remember the name of the character right now, but in seeing her dealing with the Borg trauma and having them give it that kind of analogy of, your body's not your own, the collective, is completely in charge of everything that goes on with your physical self.
Right.
And a lot of what goes on with your mental self, someone in the chat said the arms dealer. That's right, the arms dealer. And I think that seeing Jerry play that and then seeing her play kind of the aftermath of that and talking to Picard about it, they have very unique perspectives, and it's interesting to see them have a conversation, whereas, he was fully assimilated. He was fully, he was given a Borg designation. He was part of the collective. And those two characters really kind of have that interesting connection that I think they played really, just that one scene they had when she's about to beam back down to the planet in Picard, and she says like, I'm still dealing with it like every single day. And it's a really short line, but it spoke volumes to me as to how far she's come. And it's so nice to see her wearing normal clothes. She's wearing like a sweater and a leather jacket and boots that don't have huge heels on them, which is great. And just seeing her kind of come into her own. And, I don't think Seven of Nine has a Starfleet vibe within her. I think she has a more, Kira's not Starfleet either. So I think they have more of a rebel feeling in their soul that they both are bent. The arc is bending toward justice, but it's their own brand of justice. And I really think that's a really great place they took Seven. And I think that's to do with, the writers and the team that they have now on Picard is, they have lots of different, they have women, they have people of color. And I think it's really showing up in the writing and the characterizations that we're getting.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. This was really a great hour. So before we wrap up, we're going to do some quick shameless promotion. Rigel, anything you want folks to know about that you're working on?
Yeah, thanks. Check out, well, we've already mentioned them. Badass Moms, it just came out in July. Brave New Girls, the 5th volume, check that out. It just came out in July. I have a novel called Escapes coming out probably in about 2 weeks. It is, speaking of which, a bit of Deep Space Nine meets Guardians of the Galaxy. It's very much a group of interstellar exiles that get thrown together, and book 1 is their origin story. So it's how they end up forming a cohesive group. And then later on, the end of August, maybe the beginning of September, book 4 of the Sorcery and Steel series. So those are all coming soon, and lutrixbooks.com, you can find the whole bibliography.
Great. And Kelli?
I was able to do some writing for Star Trek Adventures, and I have some writing in the Cleon Coral Rubric, which just released from Modiphius, and then I will also have some work in the upcoming Shackleton Expanse book, and a story in Thrilling Adventure Yarns 2, which will be coming out from Crazy 8 Press.
Great. And Amy?
You guys can find me online at Amy Imhoff 1701 and on my website at amyimhoff.com. I've been very busy doing lots of stuff for lots of other people, but hopefully I'm going to be getting my own writing back off the ground. It's been kind of hard to write during a pandemic, but right now find me on social media, and I look forward to chatting with everybody online.
All right. Well, thank you, Amy, Rigel, and Kelli, for a great show. And thanks to everyone who's watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. And since we've been talking about women in science fiction and fantasy, it just so happens, if you're a fan of space opera with tons of strong and creative female characters who give the boys a run for their money and more, check out my own space opera, Crossline, about a modern-day space pilot thrust into a parallel Earth caught between rebellion, Armageddon, and a desperate flight to get home. And if sci-fi mystery is more your game, all right, you can check out Crackle & Fire, featuring my hard-boiled private eye, Angela Hardwick, which is available now for pre-order in ebook form, with the paperback and ebook available September 1st, both through Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. So thanks, everyone, for jumping in, and I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
See you guys.